So Hanukkah, because it didn't happen during the Tanakh era, we don't have that many sources to look at. All of our sources are from the Gemara. But actually, if we look in a certain passage, it comes up in Sefer Chagai. I'm just going to show you on my source sheet. There is one reference to a date that's very similar to the time of Hanukkah. And that happens in Chagai Parak Bet, Psukim Yechet to Kaf Gimel. Now, if anyone's doing Daf Yomi here, I actually know somebody on the chat who is doing Daf Yomi. These are the Psukim that came up yesterday in yesterday's Daf. It's right after Chagai and the Kohanim have a whole discussion about Tumah and Tara, which came up in yesterday's Daf. So this is the next group of Psukim. Anyway, so here we go. Let's take a look and see what's going on at this time in Jewish history, in the time of Chagai. So now we're right at the cusp of the Second Temple period. The Beit HaMikdash is not yet built. And we're going to explore a little bit this very fascinating time period that has so much to do with Hanukkah, even though it happens earlier than Hanukkah. So Chagai says the following to the group of people. Simu na levavchem min hayom hazeh v'mala miyom 24 latshii. So you'll notice right away, Chagai says, pay attention to this date from the 24th day of the 9th month, which we know is the 24th day of Kislev, which is actually today is the 24th day of Kislev, the day before Hanukkah. Pay attention to this date, says Chagai, because from this day we are going to Limin hayom asher yasad heichal Hashem simu levavchem. From the day that the foundation is laid for the temple, pay attention. And says Chagai, ha'od hazera b'mikura, ha'od ba'gefen ba'teina b'harimon be'etz hazayit lo nasa min hayom hazeh avarech. The fruit, the grain, all of the seeds have not grown yet, but from this day on, says Chagai, I will bless. Okay, so what's Chagai talking about here? What is he talking about? Blessing the grain and the foundation of the Beit HaMikdash. So what we have to understand is that the Jews at this time have gotten to Eretz Yisrael, and there has been a famine. And they've been living under the time of a famine. It's been terrible for them. And they've really been suffering. And all they want to know is, when will this famine be over? And Chagai says, it's over today. On the 24th day of Kislev, the famine has ended. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a second, I'm looking outside and it snowed a little bit today. And if we were in Eretz Yisrael, it would probably be cold and rainy and nothing's growing. So what do you mean that the famine has ended today? Famines can't end in the middle of Kislev. Maybe like in theory they're over, but in practice nothing can be over in the middle of Kislev. So that's what we're going to discuss today in this shiur. What was happening? What's so significant about this day, the 24th day of Kislev? Why is Chagai ending a famine in the middle of the winter? Why was there a famine to begin with? And who are these people even that we're dealing with? So in order to answer this question, we need to have a lot of background about the Second Temple period. And we need to understand that what happened was like this. There was a Beit HaMikdash, Bayit Rishon, it was destroyed. The people were sent into Galut Bavel, and they were living in Galut Bavel, and they were waiting for their Geula, waiting for their redemption. Now, redemption had never really happened to them before since Yetziat Mitzrayim, which was a really long time. The 10 tribes were exiled and they were never redeemed. So we're waiting for our redemption. And the redemption comes in a very strange way. The redemption comes in the form of a non-Jewish king named Cyrus the Great, first king of Persia, who tells his people in source here number 3, Vishnanachat lekorish melch paras, lechalot dvar Hashem mipir Yirmiyah, he'ir Hashem et ruach korish melch paras, ve'yaver kol b'chol malchuto v'gam v'mechtav lemor. Cyrus makes a declaration, and this becomes actually very famous. Even Harry Truman, when he was speaking about his role in the foundation of the state of Israel, and someone introduced him as a person who helped establish the state of Israel, Truman turned to him and said, "No, I'm Cyrus. I didn't help. I did it." And what Cyrus did is he let the Jews go back to Israel to build a Beit HaMikdash, a non-Jewish king. Now, we might look at that today and say, like, wow, that's fantastic. That's unbelievable. This is a redemption. But the people of the time, they weren't so sure. And to understand their mindset, let's take a look at a Tehillim that was written in that time period. A Tehillim that deals with the state of the people, the mindset of the people that were in Galut Bavel thinking about their redemption. And it's a parak of Tehillim that should be very familiar to us because we say it before benching on Shabbat and Chagim. And the Tehillim says like this, Shir Hamalot, Beshuv Hashem et Shivat Zion, Hayinu Kecholmim. A song of ascents. When Hashem restores us to Zion, when Hashem brings us back, it's going to be like a dream. Then our mouths will be filled with song. It's going to be said amongst the nations. Hashem has done great things with these people. Hashem has done great things with us. We are so happy. Shuva Hashem et shivitenu ka'afikim b'negev. Hashem, bring our redemption, bring our captives back like flash floods in the desert. If you know anything about the flash floods in Israel, they're actually very dangerous because they come out of nowhere and they just course through the desert without stopping. So that's what they want. Anyone who goes hiking in Israel during the winter, actually there's like a hotline you can call to see if it's nice warm weather in the desert, but you have to see what's the story with the flash floods because they can really come without warning. And then the Mizmor continues, Hazor in Bedima, those that plant with tears, Birina Yiksoru, will reap with joy. Haloch Yelechu Vacho, those that are walking and crying, Nosei Meshach Hazara, carrying the seed, Bo Yavo Birina, Nosei Alumotav, will eventually come with joy carrying the sheaves of wheat. Now, if you're paying attention, you might have noticed that there really are two parts to this Mizmor. Part number one is completely overjoyed. Here we have this person who we'll call the dreamer. And the dreamer says, our redemption is going to be amazing. It's going to be so great that even the non-Jews are going to say, wow, like Hashem has done such great things with you. You're really special. It's going to be like a flash flood. And just notice the water imagery of that flash flood. It's so fast. It's so abundant. And then the tone changes and in the second half. And the person who's thinking about the redemption, or perhaps it's a second person, says, wait a second, I don't know that it's going to be like that. Maybe it's more like somebody who plants. And when you plant a seed, it doesn't happen fast at all. It's not at all like flash flood. It's actually a very slow process. And notice the water imagery here. Here you have a person not having a flash flood, but somebody who's crying with tears, somebody who's walking. There's a process here. They're walking, holding the seed, and the person believes that eventually good things will come from this, but that it's not going to be fast, and it's certainly not going to be easy. And these two voices in the Mizmor represent two different viewpoints on the redemption. Viewpoint A was what we would call the dreamer. It's going to be fantastic. We're not going to have to work very hard. Hashem's going to do everything for us. It's going to be miraculous, just like Yetziat Mitzrayim. And viewpoint B says, I don't think that that's true. I think that it might be hard. It will eventually be wonderful. We'll be carrying those sheaves. We'll have an accomplishment, but we're going to do it. And these two voices of the Galut were coming up against each other, and it wasn't clear who was going to be right. And it's even in our sources in the Gemara, it's not clear that it had to be one way, but this is what happened. So in the first year of Koresh, the king of Persia, Cyrus the Great, lets the Jews go back to Israel. And Ezra, the one who's writing this, says, this was a wonderful thing. This was L'chalot Dvar Hashem mipi Yirmiyah. This fulfilled an earlier prophecy of Jeremiah. And people, you should all see it this way, Jewish people, and you should all go. And Koresh turns to them and says to them, Mi bachem, mi kol amo, yelo kavimo, vaya'al Yishalayim asher b'Yehuda, vayaven et Beit Hashem Elokei Yisrael, hu Elokim asher b'Yishalayim. Anybody who really has God with him, should go to Israel and build the Beit HaMikdash. But, says Cyrus the Great in Pasuk Dalid, Kol HaNishar, anyone who doesn't want to go, Mikol Mekomot Asher Hu Gar Sham, Yinas'u Anshe Mekomo B'Kesef U'B'Zahav U'B'Rechush U'B'Beima, Ima Nidava Leveit Elokim Asher B'Yerushalayim. You should just give money. I mean, we definitely heard this before. You should donate to the cause. You don't actually have to go. You can just contribute in other ways. And what we see both in Perek Aleph of Ezra, but then also explored later in the Gemara, most of the Jews opt out. They say, you know what? Sounds great for other people. You know what? Israel, it's not going to be such a great life there, not such a good economy. You know, like kind of hearing echoes, maybe the school system's not so good. I don't know about my job. Is it going to be, am I going to have a good parnasa there? So most people don't go. And the community comes to Israel and they're stragglers. They're people, they're poor, they're not well off, they're not situated well. But they're still really excited and they're dedicated towards the building of the Beit HaMikdash. This so far, we're 18 years before that verse in Chagai. The famine hasn't happened yet. And they get to Israel and things seem to be okay. They're united, they're building something together. And suddenly, things take a turn for the worse. They have a dedication ceremony. Two really difficult things happen to them. They're dedicating the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And you could just imagine what a simcha this is, what a joy to dedicate the second temple. These are people that have been waiting for years. They escaped the destruction of Bayit Rishon, and really it was a terrible destruction at the end of the first Beit HaMikdash. And many, many people died. Then they were taken as captives to Babylonia. They survived and even thrived there. They had children, and now their children are returning to their homeland, and they're going to build a second Beit HaMikdash, and they're going to reestablish Jewish presence in Eretz Israel with a Beit HaMikdash. Now, granted, it's not Jewish sovereignty because they're still just a province of Persia, but there's going to be a Jewish presence. And they start this foundation ceremony. And anyone who's been to a foundation ceremony knows that there's a lot of hoopla. There's food. There's music. Sometimes there's dancing. There's speeches. And they had all of that. There was so much going on. It was really exciting. And then, in the middle of the ceremony, something happens. Let's take a look and see how the Tanakh describes it in Ezra Perek Gimel. Vayestu habonim et heichal Hashem. So here they are with their dedication ceremony, their groundbreaking ceremony. They're going to start building the foundation. They have their ceremonial shovels ready. Vayamidu hakohanim melubashim b'chatzotzrot. And the Kohanim, they get dressed in their Big Day Kahuna. They haven't seen Kohanim dressed in Big Day Kahuna for about 60 years. And they take out the trumpets from the first Beit HaMikdash and they start to blow them. And the Leviim, B'nai Asaf, Bamil Tzatayim, and they take out their instruments and they start playing them. Lahalel et Hashem al Yedei David Melech Yisrael, and they start to sing Tehillim. The old songs that they sang in the first Beit HaMikdash, they start to sing them again. And the nation gets all excited and riled up. They're hearing their old songs. Vayanu b'halel u'b'hodot laHashem ki tov ki li'olam chasdo. Sounds familiar. They're saying Hallel. And they say, Hodu laHashem ki tov ki li'olam chasdo. Hashem has done great things for us. Thank you. Al Yisrael. For Bnei Israel, v'chol ha'am heiriu shru'a gadola. They start to shout. V'halel laHashem al husad beit Hashem. On this amazing thing that we are now starting to build the foundation of our new Beit HaMikdash. And then, v'rabim mehakohanim v'haleviim v'roshei ha'avot hazkenim asher ra'u et bayit harishon biyasdo. People who had actually been at the first Beit HaMikdash. They must have been in their 70s or 80s because they had to have been alive to remember the first Beit HaMikdash, and it had been about 60 years, but there were people there, Kohanim, Leviim, their leaders, who remembered what the Beit HaMikdash looked like. And this Zeh Habayit Be'eineihem, they take a look at this Beit HaMikdash, and there's no Aron in the second Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara tells us there's no Ner Tamid, there's no everlasting light, and there's no Urim V'Tumim, there's no breastplate that the Kohanim used to wear. And they just take a look around and they see this ragged congregation that's not at the height of their economy like they were in the time of Shlomo when Bayit Rishon was built. And they're not put together. And some of them are there because they really had nowhere else to go. Like they say about the people who are on the boat with Columbus. Why'd they go on the boat with Columbus? Maybe because they were convicts. Maybe because they really didn't have a choice. And these people, they start to cry. Could you imagine crying at the dedication ceremony of the Beit HaMikdash? Bochim b'kol gadol. And they're hysterically crying. And they say to themselves, this is what we have? This is it? Verabim, but other people, b'truah b'simcha laharim kol. They never saw Bayit Rishon. They don't know that they're supposed to be disappointed. They don't know that this isn't good enough. And the voices start to merge together. So the happy people are, they're shouting in happiness, and the sad people are crying in sadness. You can't even tell the difference between the two different voices. And the voices just merge together, and everyone just doesn't know what to do with themselves. This beautiful and joyous occasion turns sad as the younger people realize that what they have really just isn't so good. It's not good enough. It's definitely not good enough for their leaders. It wasn't good enough for the Kohanim and Leviim and the Roshei Avot, the heads of the families that had seen Bayit Rishon. And slowly the tone of this dedication ceremony turns, and the shout, it just becomes a great shout. So that's really challenge number one. And a lot of it has to do with what people came in thinking. How did you think this was going to go? Did you think that it was going to be easy? Or did you think it was going to be hard? Did you think, like the Shir Hamalot said, that you were going to get redeemed, ka'afikim ba'negev, like the flash floods in the desert? Or did you think it was going to be carrying the seed, crying, and having your tears water the seed, your hard work, your disappointment, your Beit HaMikdash without an Aron? Which one did you think? And if you thought it was going to be easy, if you thought it was going to be smooth, and if you thought you were going to be passive while Hashem was active, you had another thing coming, and you started to cry. And there we have another water imagery, but it's not the cries that are watering the seed. It's the cries of disappointment. And this is the Beit HaMikdash that we got. And if that wasn't enough, here we have Zerubbabel and Yoshua Kohen Gadol, the two leaders of the fledgling community in Israel. That was not the whole Jewish people. That was not even the wealthy members of the Jewish people. And they're still trying to get this Beit HaMikdash together. And something else happens. Another problem arises. And the problem is called the Tzarei Yehuda. Now, the enemies of Yehuda. Now, they probably didn't call themselves enemies of Yehuda, but this is what Ezra calls them when he's telling the story. Vayishma'u Tzarei Yehuda Binyamin ki bnei Hagolah bonim heichal Hashem Elokei Yisrael. The people in the surrounding areas, not in that exact area, but maybe a little bit toward the north, they hear that the Jews are building a second temple, and they're not so thrilled with it. So they come to Zerubbabel. Well, actually, we don't even know yet if they are or aren't thrilled with it. So they come to Zerubbabel and the Roshei Avot, and they say to him, Nivneh imachem. We want to help you. We want to join with you. Ki kachem nidrosh le'elokechem. We also serve your God. We also serve Hashem. V'lo anachnu zovchim mimei asar chadon melech Ashur ma'aleh otanu po. And we have been since Asar-Chadon, the king of Assyria, brought us here. Oh, okay, now we know who these people are. They're neighbors who live in the northern part of Israel where the 10 tribes used to live. And when Assyria captured the 10 tribes, they moved them out because they had a strategy to move people all over the world so that there won't be any nationalism and everyone will forget where they came from and they won't rebel against Assyria, but they moved other people in. So these people had been moved in by Assyria, and they have been serving Hashem since then. So they say, we want to serve with you. We want to build with you. Now, here we go. This is the answer to all Zerubbabel's problems. Now we can have a big Beit HaMikdash. We can have a beautiful Beit HaMikdash. Here's people who are willing to give us free labor. Maybe they can even donate more money. Maybe we can make a Beit HaMikdash out of gold. Except there's a slight problem because these people are idol worshippers. And when they say, Kachem nidrosh le'elokechem, we also worship Hashem, they don't actually worship Hashem. They think they do. But if we read their background story, we see actually they don't. They worship Hashem in some way as one of their gods, but they also worship idols. And Zerubbabel is really torn. What should I do with these people? Should I let them help or should I not? And Zerubbabel makes a decision, and he says, Zerubbabel says no. Vayomer lahem Zerubbabel v'Yoshua v'shar roshei avot liYisrael lo lachem v'lanu livno bayit le'Elokeinu. You can't help us. Ki anachnu yachad nivneh laHashem Elokei Yisrael. We alone can build a house for Hashem. It has to be that the Beit HaMikdash is built with only our values and only our religion. It's our religious center, and we can't have you having a say in how it's run. We don't serve Hashem the same way. And the people don't take it so well. They're not so excited to hear Zerubbabel's answer. Vayhi am haaretz mirapim yedei am Yehuda u'mevahalim otam livnot. They say, you don't want us? We're gonna ruin you. And what do? So chrim aleim yoatzim lahafer atzatam. They do something very modern. They hire lobbyists to go to Cyrus, and they bribe people, and they bribe some of the ministers in the Persian government, and they tell Cyrus, the Jews are rebelling against you. You see that big building that they're trying to build? It's going to be a center of their insurgency. You can't let them. And Cyrus withdraws his support, and the Beit HaMikdash project shuts down. And here they are, living the dream, living in Israel. Here they are, living the life that they were dreaming of, and there's no Beit HaMikdash. And they can't build the Beit HaMikdash. They can't bring themselves to get there because they just had too many problems. And it's not clear that they absolutely couldn't have. It's possible that they could have also hired their own lobbyists. They could have also bribed their own ministers, but they don't want to. At that point, they just don't. They go back to their houses, they settle down, and they say, you know what? This is just too hard. And to add insult to injury, a famine starts. And the famine rages through the land. And people say, oh, it's a good thing we didn't build the Beit HaMikdash, because that would have been a terrible mistake. With a famine and with all these enemies around us, and nobody could agree on anything, this is just a disaster. I'm sure it went through people's heads. I wish we would have stayed in Persia. We should never have come here. 18 years go by, and this is how the people are living. And Cyrus has his day, and his son Cambyses, he rules. And suddenly there's a new king, and the new king's name is Darius. And it's the second year of Darius. And you might think that at this time, people would say, it's a new king. It's a new era. Darius isn't even a descendant of Cyrus. Let's try again. But they don't, because they've already given up. And that's where Haggai comes in. That's where the Navi Haggai steps onto the stage. We don't know his background. He's one of the Treyasar. And I always tell my students, more people should name their children Haggai, because he's probably the only successful Navi that we had. Haggai is the one that convinces them to build the Beit HaMikdash. And they actually like him. So this is like unprecedented with all the Nebuot. Everyone hates their Navi, but they like Haggai. And maybe it's because they haven't had a Navi in 50 years. They haven't had a Navi since Yechezkel, and now they miss it. So it's the second year of Darius, and It's the 6th month. It's the month of Elul, and it's the first of the month, time when people think about maybe doing tshuva. Chagai steps on to the scene, and everyone's flabbergasted. A Navi here in this time? I thought we had no more Naviim. I thought Nevuah ended with the first Beit HaMikdash. Chagai opens his mouth and he says these beautiful words of Nevuah, Ko Amar Hashem, so says Hashem. And the people are wrapped with attention. And he says to them, Ha'am hazeh amru, lo eit ba et Beit Hashem lihibano. I know what you're saying. You're saying it's not the time to build the Beit HaMikdash. And then you see that little pay over there? That means it's a sof perek. That means there was a break. And that means the Chagai stepped down and gave people time to think about it. And what did he mean? The people are saying it's not time to build the Beit HaMikdash. So the Malbim explains over here in source number 7, שהיה מקובל ביד האומה מפי הנביאים שלפני הגאולה האמיתית צריך שיהיה מופתים בשמיים ובארץ. That before the final redemption there have to be miracles. ושיהיה מלחמת גוג ומגוג, there has to be Armageddon or some type of great battle between forces, just like all the prophets said. There's nothing happened that's supposed to set you up for having a redemption. So this can't possibly be a good time to build the Beit HaMikdash because it just doesn't feel right. Where's my miracle? Where's my easy time? Where's my afikim b'negev? Where's my flash floods in the desert? Where's Hashem doing it for me? And Chagai says, you don't really want it. You just want to be passive. You want Hashem to do everything for you. But if you really wanted it, then the second Darius took over, you would have started building. You would have tested the waters. You would have hired your own lobbyists. You would have taken action. You would have been what we would call the farmer, carrying the seed and watering the seed with his tears. And then Chagai says to them, Ha'et lachem lashevet, it's like a real sucker punch. Ha'et lachem lashevet bebatechem sfunim v'habayit hazeh charev. You can sit in your paneled houses when my house is destroyed. You had extra wood. You had extra money, you used it on your houses, you put on a second layer onto your house. You closed yourself off into your houses when it was time to open yourselves up and try something and build the Beit HaMikdash. And then Chagai says like this, he says, do you know why there's been a famine? I know what you're saying. You're saying we can't possibly build in a famine. A recession is no time to start a building project. But guess what, says Chagai, you have it all wrong. The reason why there was a famine is because Hashem was punishing you for not building the Beit HaMikdash. That famine was Hashem trying to communicate with you. That famine was supposed to be a push for you to do better, to build. And you totally misinterpreted it. And you thought that that meant you should pull back. And the people listen to Chagai, and they say that they want to build the Beit HaMikdash. Now, I want to share a beautiful essay with you now. Maybe some of you have heard it. It's called Welcome to Holland. Have any of you heard of this essay before? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm gonna put the link to the essay in the chat. So if you want, you can read it afterwards or during if you're bored. It's a beautiful essay written by the mom of a special needs child. And she's trying, Emily Pearl Kingsley, it's pretty famous. She wrote it in 1987. And she's trying to explain to the world what it meant to the experience of raising a child with a disability. And she says that this is what it's like. When you're going to have a baby, and there you are and you're pregnant, she says it's like planning a fabulous vacation to Italy. And you get everything ready for your vacation to Italy. You buy the guidebooks, you buy the tickets, you learn some Italian, you pack your bag, special thing for the Italian weather, and you get on the plane and you're off in the air, and the stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean, Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to go to Italy. All my life, I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. And she says, Holland isn't disgusting. Holland isn't terrible. It's not dirty. There's no disease there, but it is different and it's not what you expected. And now you have to go out, and all those preparations that you did for Italy, you now have to do on the fly for Holland. You have to buy new guidebooks, and you have to learn a new language, and you're going to meet new people, and you're going to have a completely different experience. And she says, it's a different place. It's a slower pace than Italy, less flashy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips, and Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and everyone's talking about Italy, and they're bragging about what a wonderful time you have. And the rest of your life, you'll say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And she says, and it's so real and so poignant, the pain of that will never, ever, ever go away. That loss of not having what you expected, because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't go to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. And I think this essay speaks so beautifully about raising a special needs child and actually raising all children. And I love to see that there are moms and daughters here, because it is such a special experience, and each child is different than each other, but also each child is always different than what the parents expected. And she talks about letting go of certain expectations, and that allowing a person to be free, and free to live the life that they're actually living. And what happened during the time of Bayit Sheni, going back to our Shir Hamalot, is that people had a lot of expectations about what their redemption was going to look like, what their life was going to look like. And then problems came up. And as the problems came up, they just couldn't deal with another problem, because each problem was a nail in the coffin of the life I was supposed to live. And therefore, they did give up. They didn't continue to keep pressing on to build the Beit HaMikdash, because everything just didn't work out the way I had expected it to work out. So that's why you had people crying at the dedication ceremony. That's why when the enemies hire lobbyists and bribe ministers, that's just too much to deal with. I can't go on the offensive. It seems too hard. And then a famine, forget it. I left my life in Persia for this? And then Haggai says, well, then you don't really want it, because you know what? This Beit HaMikdash is going to be different. And it's not going to be miraculous like the first one was. And it's not even necessarily going to be easy, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable. It doesn't mean that Hashem's not there. And it doesn't mean that Hashem stops communicating with you or caring about you. And the thing that you thought was the worst, that famine, is actually something that's the best for you. It was a communication. And the people listen, and they're inspired, and they build the Beit HaMikdash. And now we get to that date of Chanukah that we spoke about. And Haggai says to the people over here in source number 1, Simu na levavchem min hayom hazeh v'mala miyom 24 l'tshi'i lemin hayom asher yasad et heichal Hashem simu levavchem. Keep note of this date, the 24th of Kislev. We're in the middle of the rainy season. I know that you're actually also in the middle of a famine. But I want you to know, says Haggai, Min Hayom Hazeh, from this day forward, where am I? Min Hayom Hazeh Avarech. From this day forward, I am blessing you. Meaning the famine is over tomorrow. The famine is over on the 25th of Kislev. Now, you won't actually see that the famine's over because nothing's going to grow until the spring and summer. But I am telling you that the famine is over. And why would Haggai do that in the middle of the winter? Why won't he declare the end of the famine in the spring, where they can actually see that the famine's over? So this is part of what Haggai was trying to teach them, that you don't need instant gratification. I don't want it to be that the second I say the famine is over, you say to me, oh yeah, let me see, where is it? Says Haggai, you have to learn to have emunah. You need to have faith. And that's why I'll declare the end of the famine in the middle of the winter. And I know I call this year the earliest Chanukah, but actually it's not really the earliest Chanukah. The earliest Chanukah comes up in the Gemara Avodah Zarah Daf Chet, which talks about that Adam Harishon sinned. And the Gemara says that Adam was created around in Tishrei time, around Rosh Hashanah. And then Adam sinned that day, around then. And then he saw, after his sin, that the days got slowly shorter. And Adam said to himself, oh my goodness, the world must be returning to tohu vavohu. And he thought that now he's just slowly going to get killed. But then something happened on a very special day in Kislev in December. And that is, one day got a little bit lighter. And Adam said to himself, here we go. Adam said to himself, this is the order of the world. This is how the world is. Hashem's not destroying the world. The days get shorter, the days get longer. And therefore he went, this is what's known as the Winter Solstice. The shortest day of the year comes right before the second shortest day of the year, but it's on a path to days becoming longer. He went and observed a festival for 8 days, just around the time of Chanukah. And what did he do in that time? He lit candles because the days are getting longer. We learn in Gemara Shabbat that there's a debate between Hillel and Shammai. How should we light the menorah? And Shammai says that on the first day, you should light 8 candles. On the second day, 7, 6, and so on. This is according to the diminishing number of sacrifices. But Beit Hillel says, Beit Hillel omrim, Yom Rishon madlik achad, u'mekan ve'elech mosif b'holech. On the first day, you should light 1. And on the next day, you should light 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. And we decide like Beit Hillel, because Hillel says you should always increase your light. You should always increase your Kedusha. You should always bring more and more into the world. And I think really this is the message of Haggai. And this is the message of the end of the famine and the message of the Second Temple period. And I think also that this is the message of Chanukah. That Chanukah happens in the middle of the winter. And in the middle of the winter, things are dark. And the darkness represents difficulty, and the darkness represents disappointment, and the darkness represents failures and closing ourselves off. And it's easy to do that in the winter because we stay in our houses and things feel really low. And Haggai says to them, no, min hayom hazeh avarech. You don't see it now, but the famine is over. And the reason the famine is over is because you have learned to deal with your disappointments. You've learned to say, Holland is a great place also. Not everything has to work out exactly the way you expected it to. Not everything has to be Italy. But when you come to terms with it, that it might work out the way you want, or it might not. When we come to terms with our disappointment, with the winter, that's when we can bring light into the world. And that's when we can say, Mosif v'holech, increase the light. And every day of Chanukah, we bring a little bit more light. And it parallels the solstice because there's a little bit more light coming into the world. We're moving towards the spring. And Haggai says, and that's the day that the famine is over. And what's interesting is if you look in the Gemara, we'll see that Hanukkah was not established right when it was, right when it happened. That actually it was established the following year. And perhaps that's because the Chachamim wanted to see, like, what's the right day to make Hanukkah? Meaning this miracle lasted 8 days. Maybe we would have taken the first one. Maybe we would have taken the last one. Maybe we would have taken some day from the war. And I think perhaps they chose this day, the 25th day of Kislev, to parallel the end of the famine in the time of Chagai, to say that this story of Hanukkah, it's the same idea as ending that famine during the Beit HaMikdash time. Now, actually, in the Gemara of Shabbat, we ask, what is Hanukkah? Why do we kindle these lights on Hanukkah? And we learn that when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hashmonaim came and overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and searched and found only one cruse of oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And it was only enough for one night. And at that point, the Hashmonaim could have said, it's just too hard. It's just not enough. They could have looked around at their defiled Beit HaMikdash, at their people that had deserted them. Most of the people became Hellenists, at the people that didn't care anymore so much about the Beit HaMikdash. And they could have said, it's just not worth it. And instead, perhaps, this is what we're celebrating. When the Hashmonaim said, let's just try it. Let's do what we can. Let's light one night of oil. Let's start cleaning the Beit HaMikdash. And who would have guessed that oil would have lasted in a time of Bayit Sheni, where there really were no miracles. All of the miraculous things were lost. The Aron, the Ner Tamid, this little bottle of oil lasted for 8 days. They could have had no way of knowing that. But the miracle is that they tried to do it anyway, that they lit it on the first night, knowing that they wouldn't really be able to light the menorah on the second night, that they didn't do what the people did in the beginning of Bayit Sheni, but they grabbed onto what the people did during the time of Chagai and said, you know what? We'll build the Beit HaMikdash even during a famine. We'll build the Beit HaMikdash even if the Persian kings are unfriendly. We'll build the Beit HaMikdash even though those same enemies are going to come up against us again. We're willing to take the risk and we're willing to try. And if it's not as good as we thought it would be, then we're going to adjust our expectations and we're going to find the good that it is. And they found the good in that oil. And I just want to close by reading a passage from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, because the truth is, what's a better place to learn about what's really important in life than from people who are in a concentration camp and really had nothing? And Viktor Frankl talks about his experiences. He's a psychologist, talked about his experiences in the camps. And he said, we who lived in a concentration camp can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to these powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become a plaything of the circumstance, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of a typical inmate. And with this passage, Viktor Frankl reminds us that the greatest freedom that we have as humans, and something that we reconnect with in the time of Hanukkah, is to choose our attitudes, is to choose how we want to see things, is to choose how we want to invest in things. And that lighting that one candle that we're going to be doing tomorrow night, perhaps is the greatest thing that we could do. As we light one candle, and we don't know if we'll light a second candle, but we're going to light this one anyway. And every day of Hanukkah, we're going to bring a little bit more light. We're going to embrace our winter. We're going to say, you know what? This winter is the first day towards spring. The famine is over. And Chagai is the one who taught us that. Chagai is the one who said, I'm ending the famine in the winter, because it's important for us to believe that the famine is over. even when we can't see it. So I hope that this Chanukah, we can infuse ourselves with light, our families, our communities, but I would say mostly ourselves when we think about what we have and what we can give and how we deal with our own winters, how we deal with our own darkness, and how we can change that and bring a little bit of light, just one candle, into our winter, and to share it also with others to light each other's candles. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Cheryl for organizing. It was wonderful to learn with you.